You shovel grain for gods who don't know you exist. Tonight, let's fall asleep to the sound of your dignity being taxed. Picture this. You're born into ancient Egypt, and congratulations, you've just won the worst lottery in human history. Your mother gives birth to you behind a grain silo because privacy is a luxury reserved for people who own grain silos, not people who clean them. She wipes you off with palm fronds, which is basically nature's sandpaper, and before you've even figured out what blinking is, you hand it over to an overseer whose breath smells like fermented fish and broken dreams. Your first word isn't mama or dada, it's sorry, because in ancient Egypt being sorry is basically your default state of existence. Your second word is yes master, which will become your most frequently used phrase for the next however many years you manage to survive. Childhood isn't a magical time of wonder and discovery here, it's a countdown timer to becoming useful, and the clock is ticking loud enough to wake the dead, which is ironic because waking the dead is basically Egypt's national pastime. By age 5 you're already intimately familiar with the taste of sand, not because you're playing in sandboxes, those don't exist for people like you. You taste sand because it's in everything. Your food, your water, your clothes, your mouth when you sleep with it open, which you do because nasal breathing is complicated when your nose is perpetually stuffed with dust from grain silos and limestone quarries. You learn to walk by following other slaves who shuffle from task to task like a parade of human misery. Your feet develop calluses that have calluses, your hands crack and bleed from handling rough materials all day, and the local medical treatment for this is essentially rub some dirt on it and get back to work, which would be sarcastic advice in any other civilization. But here it's literally what they tell you to do. By age 7, you've mastered the art of eating while walking, sleeping while standing, and crying without making noise. These are essential life skills in ancient Egypt, right up there with not dying of dysentery and pretending you can't hear when nobles complain about their eyeliner not being dark enough. You live on a diet that consists primarily of onions, stale bread, and whatever hope you can scrape together from the bottom of your soul. The onions aren't a garnish, they're literally your main source of nutrition. Ancient Egyptians believed onions could prevent disease, which explains why everyone smells like they've been wrestling with the contents of a spice rack, but doesn't explain why everyone still dies of preventable diseases anyway. You eat so many onions that your tears taste like French soup, which would be touching if French soup existed yet. Your living situation is what modern people might charitably call rustic, and what honest people would call a pile of straw in a shed. You share this space with approximately 17 other slaves, 3 families of mice, and whatever insects have decided your corner of Egypt looks like prime real estate. Privacy is a foreign concept. Personal space is a myth. The closest thing you have to alone time is when you're assigned solo tasks, like carrying water jugs that weigh more than you do across distances that would make modern marathon runners weep. You wake up before dawn every day because the sun is your alarm clock, and, unlike modern alarm clocks, you can't hit snooze. The rooster that crows to wake everyone up is probably the only creature in Egypt with a worse attitude than the overseers, which is saying something. You stumble out of your straw pile, immediately step on something that's either a sharp rock or someone else's foot, and begin another day of what the nobles probably call character building, but what you call barely surviving. Your morning routine consists of splashing water on your face if there's water available, which there usually isn't, so mostly you just splash dust on your face and hope for the best. You eat whatever breakfast has been allotted to your particular tier of human misery, usually more onions and bread that's been staled since the previous dynasty. Then you report to whatever overseer has drawn the short straw for managing your particular group of exhausted humans. The work begins immediately and never really stops. At age 9, you're dodging leather whips and carting mud bricks up scaffolding that sways in the wind, like a drunk person trying to walk in a straight line. The scaffolding is held together with rope, prayer, and what you're pretty sure is just stubbornness. You climb these death traps while carrying materials that weigh approximately as much as a small horse, and if you slip, your main concern isn't the fall, it's the lecture you'll get about damaging the brick. The nobles, meanwhile, spend their time debating the finer points of eye makeup application and whether their particular shade of gold jewellery properly complements their skin tone. They worry about things like, does this crown make my head look fat? While you worry about things like, will I survive until lunch? Their biggest daily struggle is deciding which precious stone matches their mood. Your biggest daily struggle is not collapsing from exhaustion before you've finished carrying enough stones to build what will eventually become someone else's eternal resting place. You smell like a combination of sweat, smoke, and foot rot, which sounds terrible but is actually an improvement over some of the other slaves, who smell like things that died and were forgotten about. Personal hygiene is a luxury you can't afford, both literally and temporally. There's no time for bathing when you're working from sunrise to sunset, and even if there were time, the water supply is reserved for more important things, like keeping the nobles' decorative pools filled and making sure their wine is properly diluted. The closest you've come to actual hygiene is not dying of infection yet, which is basically a miracle, considering your living conditions and the fact that ancient Egyptian medical knowledge consists primarily of "have you tried praying about it?" and "maybe more onions would help." You learn to identify different types of cuts and scrapes by how much they hurt and whether they're attracting flies. Flies, incidentally, are basically Egypt's unofficial mascot. They're everywhere, they're persistent, and they seem to genuinely enjoy making bad situations worse. By the time you're 10, you've already figured out the 3 fundamental truths of ancient Egyptian existence. Gods are decorative, bread is currency, and hope is for rich people. The gods are depicted everywhere, carved into walls, painted on pottery, sculpted into statues that cost more than you'll earn in several lifetimes. But they never seem to help with practical problems like, "How do I not starve today?" or "Why does everything hurt all the time?" Bread is literally used as payment, which makes sense because everyone needs to eat, but also means your salary can go moldy. Nothing quite captures the desperation of ancient Egyptian economics like receiving your weekly wages and immediately having to worry about them developing fungus before you can consume them. It's like getting paid in bananas, except bananas don't exist in ancient Egypt, so you don't even have that frame of reference for how ridiculous your situation is. Hope, you've observed, seems to be exclusively available to people who can afford to commission their own tomb paintings. Rich people hope for eternal life, perfect weather, and successful harvests. You hope for things like, "Maybe today no one will hit me with a stick," and "Perhaps this water won't give me dysentery." Your aspirations have been calibrated to match your circumstances, which is probably healthy psychologically but depressing in every other possible way. Welcome to Egypt, where the sun is always shining, the work never stops, and your life expectancy is roughly equivalent to that of a houseplant in a drought. But hey, at least you're contributing to one of history's greatest civilizations. Sure, you'll never see any of the benefits, and yes, you'll probably die young and forgotten, but somewhere in the distant future, tourists will marvel at the monuments you helped build while complaining about the heat and looking for air conditioning. Sleep tight, future archaeological footnote. Congratulations, you've been promoted. Not to anything that would make your parents proud, assuming you knew who your parents were, and assuming they were still alive to have opinions about your career trajectory. No, you've been promoted from general-purpose suffering person to specialized limestone hauling suffering person. It's like winning a lottery, where the grand prize is scoliosis. Your new job involves dragging stones that weigh more than you do across distances that seem to expand while you're walking them. These aren't decorative pebbles. These are massive chunks of limestone that were presumably carved by people who confused building material with instrument of torture. Each stone is roughly the size and weight of a modern refrigerator, except refrigerators haven't been invented yet, so you have no frame of reference for exactly how ridiculous your situation is. The pyramid construction site is what modern people might call an OSHA violation waiting to happen, and what you call Tuesday. There are no safety protocols unless you count "try not to die" as a protocol, which the overseers apparently do. Workers fall off scaffolding with the regularity of seasonal rainfall, except more predictable. The worksite is constantly filled with the sounds of hammering, shouting, and occasional screaming, which creates an atmosphere that's part construction zone, part medieval torture chamber. You wake up each morning and immediately assess which parts of your body hurt the most, then prioritize your suffering accordingly. Your back has developed a permanent curve that makes you look like you're perpetually bowing to invisible royalty, which is actually pretty appropriate given your social status. Your hands have transformed into something resembling leather gloves that someone filled with broken glass and then left in the sun to cure. The daily routine begins before dawn because apparently the ancient Egyptian workday starts when most reasonable civilizations would still be having nightmares. You're roused from whatever passes for sleep by overseers who have clearly confused motivational sleeping with screaming threats. They walk through the sleeping areas, banging metal tools together and shouting things like, "Up, you worthless sand rats," which is both insulting and zoologically inaccurate. Breakfast, such as it is, consists of the same bread and onions that have become your signature dish, except now the bread is staler and the onions are more wilted, as if the food supply is aging in reverse dog years. You eat while standing because sitting down implies you have time to sit down, which you don't. The water ration has been reduced because apparently the local water supply is needed for more important things, like keeping the supervisor's decorative gardens properly irrigated. Then begins the stone hauling, which is exactly as pleasant as it sounds. You're assigned to a team of other, similarly desperate individuals, and together you approach limestone blocks that seem to grow larger as you get closer to them. The stones are loaded onto wooden sleds that screech across the sand like dying animals, pulled by ropes that seem specifically designed to give you splinters in the most inconvenient places possible. The hauling process involves a complex choreography of human misery. Everyone grabs the rope at the same time, everyone leans forward at the same angle, and everyone pulls with the desperate strength of people who know that failure means being reassigned to an even worse job, which you didn't think was possible until you started working construction. The stone moves approximately 3 inches, then stops. You repeat this process several thousand times until the stone has travelled the required distance, by which point you've lost feeling in your hands and gained a new appreciation for the concept of futility. The overseers, meanwhile, stand in whatever shade they can find and offer helpful commentary like, "Pull harder," and "Are you even trying?" and "My grandmother could move that stone faster, and she's been dead for 6 years." They carry long wooden sticks that they use for motivation, which is ancient Egyptian for hitting people who aren't working fast enough. These sticks are wielded with the precision of conductors leading an orchestra, except the music is screaming and the symphony is human suffering. If you drop a stone, which happens because you're human and humans have limits, you get corrected with something long, wooden, and splintery. The correction process involves a detailed explanation of why dropping stones is counterproductive, delivered at high volume, and punctuated with physical demonstrations of why you should try harder next time. You learn to catch falling stones with your feet, your shoulders, your face, whatever body part is available and not currently supporting something else heavy. The workday continues until the sun sets, which in Egypt feels like approximately 17 hours later. By this point, your feet have developed new and creative ways to bleed into whatever you're using for shoes, which is usually just more feet. Your back doesn't just hurt, it hums like a plague hymn, creating its own soundtrack of misery that follows you wherever you go. Dinner consists of the same nutritional powerhouses that have sustained you all day, onions and bread, with the occasional olive if someone important has died and the kitchen staff is feeling generous. 2 olives if it was someone really important. You eat while lying down because standing up requires energy you no longer possess, and sleeping while eating has become a valuable time management skill. You sleep on straw that's been used by so many previous workers that it's basically become a geological formation. The straw is older than some of the monuments you're building, and significantly less comfortable. You share your sleeping space with the usual collection of insects, rodents, and other workers who snore in languages you don't recognize, but which all sound like variations on the theme of exhaustion. But then something changes. Not something good. In ancient Egypt, change is usually bad news, but something different. One day, while hauling a particularly vindictive piece of limestone, you accidentally say something sarcastic within earshot of a scribe. It's nothing profound, just a muttered comment about how the stone seems to be gaining weight as you drag it, but instead of being beaten with a stick, you hear something you haven't heard in months. Laughter. Slave with wit? This is apparently as revolutionary as discovering fire, except less useful for cooking. The scribe, who's probably never done physical labour in his life, and whose biggest daily challenge is keeping his writing instruments properly sharpened, finds your misery amusing in a way that's somehow different from the usual look at the suffering peasants' entertainment that nobles enjoy. Suddenly, you're reassigned to the temple kitchens, which is like being promoted from the 7th circle of hell to the 6th circle of hell. Technically an improvement, but still objectively terrible. Your new job involves preparing food for people who actually matter, cleaning cooking implements with water that's occasionally clean, and trying not to think too hard about what some of the more mysterious ingredients actually are. The temple kitchens are an improvement in the sense that you're now working indoors, which means marginally less sun exposure and slightly fewer opportunities to be trampled by livestock. You're still overworked, still underfed, and still operating on approximately 3 hours of sleep per night, but now the rats are better fed, which seems like progress even though it probably is. You've climbed the social ladder of Egyptian servitude, which is to say you've reached rung 2 of an infinitely vertical pit. From down here, rung 1 looks almost nostalgic, and you can't even see what's above you because it's too far up and probably on fire anyway, but hey, at least now you're working with food instead of limestone, and food is generally less likely to crush you if you drop it. Sleep tight, kitchen rat. The pharaoh dies. Not your pharaoh. You don't actually have a pharaoh in any meaningful sense, since your relationship with royalty consists primarily of hoping they don't notice you exist. No, this is someone else's pharaoh. But death of any pharaoh is apparently a big enough deal to reorganize everyone's life, including people who were already having their lives reorganized on a regular basis by forces beyond their control. Death in ancient Egypt isn't just a personal tragedy. It's a logistical nightmare that creates job opportunities in the most unexpected places. The entire kingdom goes into mourning, which involves a lot of wailing, a lot of preparation for the afterlife, and a sudden spike in demand for people who can handle dead bodies without fainting, vomiting, or running away screaming. Congratulations, you've just qualified for a career change you never wanted. You're reassigned to the embalming district, which is exactly as pleasant as it sounds. Your new workplace is a complex of buildings that smell like a combination of death, preservatives, and whatever spices people think make death smell better, but actually just make it smell like spiced death. The architecture is designed for efficient corpse processing, which means lots of stone tables, drainage systems, and strategic ventilation that doesn't quite work as well as the architects probably hoped. Your job description is delightfully vague. Assist with the preparation of the deceased for their eternal journey. In practice, this means you clean tools that have been used for purposes you try not to think about. You mop up bodily fluids that you definitely try not to think about. And you try not to pass out when someone drops an organ that was recently inside a person who was recently alive. The tools of the embalming trade are sophisticated and terrifying. There are hooks for removing brains through nasal passages, knives for making incisions in places that shouldn't have incisions, and jars for storing body parts in organized collections that look like the world's most disturbing filing system. You learn to clean these instruments without asking too many questions about their specific functions, because the answers would probably give you nightmares, and you're already having enough nightmares about limestone blocks. The embalming process itself is a complex ritual that combines religious ceremony with what modern people would recognize as very early medical procedure, except without any of the medical knowledge that makes medical procedures sensible. Bodies are washed, dried, treated with various substances that may or may not actually preserve anything, and wrapped in enough linen to supply a small textile factory. You learn to identify different stages of decomposition by smell alone, which is a skill that will never appear on any resume but which becomes surprisingly useful in your daily work routine. Fresh corpses smell different from day-old corpses, which smell different from week-old corpses, and so on through a spectrum of olfactory experiences that you never wanted to have, but now can't avoid having. The social hierarchy of death is fascinating and depressing. Rich people get elaborate preservation treatments involving expensive oils, custom-fitted sarcophagi, and burial goods that cost more than entire villages see in a year. Poor people get basic preservation and burial in communal graves that are basically ancient Egypt's version of a budget funeral plan. Your job is to assist with all social levels of death, which means you see exactly how much inequality extends into the afterlife. The religious aspects of embalming are complex and numerous. Every step of the process involves prayers, rituals, and ceremonies designed to ensure the deceased person's successful transition to the afterlife. You learn these rituals not because anyone expects you to understand them, but because someone needs to hold the ceremonial objects and someone needs to clean up after the ceremonies. And you're someone. But then something unexpected happens. You meet someone who's alive, which is refreshing in your current work environment. He's a boy with a limp and a name that sounds too royal for his frail little body. Tutankhamun. He's visiting the embalming district for reasons that probably involve learning about death before he's old enough to worry about his own mortality, which is ironically appropriate. He watches you sweep, which is not normally an activity that attracts royal attention. You're cleaning around a particularly aromatic corpse when you make a joke about the smell. Nothing elaborate, just a muttered comment about how this particular deceased person clearly didn't eat enough onions in life. It's the kind of joke that would normally get you beaten with sticks, but instead, the boy laughs. And just like that, you're promoted again, not to anything that makes sense. You're now a palace errand boy, which is somehow different from being a temple kitchen assistant, though the distinction isn't entirely clear to you. Your new job involves silence, subservience, and not making eye contact with the gods' representatives unless they sneeze, at which point you're expected to say bless you without actually making eye contact, which is a surprisingly difficult social skill to master. The palace is a different world entirely. Instead of limestone and dead bodies, you're surrounded by gold leaf, precious stones, and living people who smell like expensive oils instead of decomposition. The floors are made of materials that don't hurt your feet, the walls are decorated with art instead of tool storage, and the food is prepared by people who know what spices are besides onions. Your daily routine now involves running errands for people who have never carried anything heavier than their own jewelry. You deliver messages, fetch items, and perform various tasks that seem designed to keep you moving but not necessarily to accomplish anything important. It's like being part of an elaborate performance, where everyone knows their role except you, and your role is apparently person who does things when asked. The palace servants operate according to a complex social hierarchy that makes the construction site look like a democratic collective. There are servants who serve other servants, assistants who assist other assistants, and people whose entire job is telling other people how to do their jobs. You're somewhere near the bottom of this hierarchy, but at least you're inside the hierarchy instead of being completely outside it. You're finally inside the system, which is progress of a sort. You're no longer completely disposable. Now you're only mostly disposable, which is a meaningful upgrade in ancient Egyptian terms. You have access to better food, cleaner water, and sleeping arrangements that don't actively make your life worse every night. But you're also inside the system just in time for it to start collapsing, because that's exactly the kind of timing that has characterized your entire life so far. Political tensions are rising, religious changes are creating uncertainty, and there are whispers about succession issues that make everyone nervous. The palace, which seemed like stability compared to your previous work environments, is starting to feel like the eye of a storm that's still gathering strength. Sleep tight, palace furniture. Tutankhamun grows up fast, but not in the fun way that involves getting taller and stronger. He grows up in the way that involves everyone constantly whispering about whether he'll survive to his next birthday, which creates a certain urgency around all his daily activities. Meanwhile, you shadow him like a particularly dusty ghost, which is your actual job description. Follow the boy king around and try to prevent him from dying accidentally. Your role has evolved from person who does things when asked to person who does things before being asked, which requires developing supernatural intuition about what a teenage pharaoh might need at any given moment. This includes anticipating his need for water, food, clean clothes, writing materials, entertainment, medical attention, and protection from various palace hazards that include both political intrigue and actual physical dangers like stairs that are more treacherous than they appear. The palace is full of stairs, and every single one of them seems designed by someone who actively disliked people with feet. They're uneven, poorly lit, and placed in locations that maximize the chances of someone falling down them at the worst possible moment. You learn to navigate these stairs while carrying various objects, walking backwards, and maintaining constant vigilance for potential threats, which makes you feel like you're performing in an extremely dangerous ballet. Your daily routine now revolves entirely around Tutankhamun's schedule, which is packed with activities that range from boring but safe to potentially lethal. He has lessons with tutors who teach him about government, religion, mathematics, and other subjects that pharaohs apparently need to know. He has meetings with advisors who discuss policy matters while watching each other for signs of treachery. He has ceremonial duties that involve wearing heavy crowns and standing still for hours while people make speeches about his divine nature. You fetch oils that cost more than you used to earn in a year, including frankincense that comes from trees you've never seen, myrrh that smells like expensive medicine, and various other substances that make the Boy King smell like a walking advertisement for luxury goods. These oils serve multiple purposes. They make him smell appropriately royal, they protect his skin from the harsh Egyptian climate, and they serve as a kind of aromatic armor against the various unpleasant odors that characterize palace life. Political navigation becomes your most important skill, even though nobody actually teaches you how to do it. You learn to read the facial expressions of various court officials, to identify which conversations you should pretend not to hear, and to disappear from rooms when certain combinations of people enter them. The palace is full of people who smile while planning each other's destruction, and your survival depends on staying invisible during their interactions. You deflect blame with the precision of someone who's always been one mistake away from execution, which is exactly what you are. When things go wrong, and they go wrong constantly, you've learned to position yourself so that you can't possibly be held responsible, while simultaneously being available to help fix whatever went wrong. It's like being a human Switzerland, neutral, helpful, and strategically positioned to avoid being invaded by angry officials. Dodging actual accidents becomes a specialized skill set. The palace is full of hazards that include unstable furniture, decorative objects that fall without warning, pets that belong to important people and therefore can't be harmed, even when they're trying to harm you, and architectural features that were designed for aesthetic purposes rather than safety. You develop reflexes that allow you to catch falling objects, redirect aggressive animals, and navigate around drunk nobles with equal facility. Religious overhauls happen with disturbing frequency, and each one requires learning new protocols, new ceremonies, and new ways to avoid accidentally committing blasphemy. The gods apparently change their preferences regularly, which means rituals that were mandatory last month might be forbidden this month, and keeping track of current divine preferences becomes a full-time job within your full-time job. Tutankhamun starts asking for your opinion, which is either a sign of trust or a sign that he's running out of people to talk to. Your responses are carefully calibrated to be helpful without being presumptuous, informative without being threatening, and honest without being suicidal. You develop a conversational style that combines gentle sarcasm with absolute loyalty, which apparently appeals to a teenage pharaoh who's surrounded by people who are either trying to control him. The Boy King likes your approach to conversation, probably because you're the only person in the palace who talks to him like he's a human being rather than a divine symbol or a political asset. You joke about minor palace annoyances, make observations about the absurdity of certain court rituals, and occasionally offer practical suggestions about how to make his daily routine less miserable. It's not exactly friendship, he's a pharaoh and you're human furniture, but there's something almost warm there. Together you survive bureaucracy that makes construction work look like a relaxing vacation. The palace administrative system involves multiple layers of officials who all need to approve everything, but none of whom want to take responsibility for anything. Simple tasks like get the pharaoh a cup of water by navigating through a complex chain of command that includes supervisors, coordinators, administrators, and various other people whose job descriptions seem to involve making simple things complicated. You also survive suspicious accidents that aren't accidents at all. Stairs mysteriously become slippery, food occasionally tastes strange, and various palace fixtures develop sudden structural problems that coincidentally occur when Tutankhamun is nearby. Your job includes noticing these patterns and subtly steering the Boy King away from potential dangers without creating panic or alerting the people who are probably causing the dangers. The palace operates on a schedule of constant low-level crisis management. Every day brings new problems that require immediate attention. Diplomatic issues with neighboring kingdoms, religious disputes between competing priest factions, economic problems that affect tax collection, and various personal dramas involving court officials who can't distinguish between their professional responsibilities and their personal grudges. But then, one morning, everything changes. Tutankhamun doesn't wake up. Or maybe he does wake up, but not well. Something is wrong in a way that can't be fixed with oils, ceremonies, or political maneuvering. The boy who laughed at your jokes, who trusted you with his safety, who treated you like a person instead of property, is now lying still, in a way that makes everyone whisper and no one want to make eye contact. The palace goes quiet first, then loud, then terrifying, quiet when people realize something is wrong, loud when they start trying to figure out what to do about it, and terrifying when they start making decisions about who's responsible and what needs to happen next. You've been too close to the king, too trusted, too visible. Someone decides that loyal attendance will be needed in the afterlife. And guess who's now officially too close to the king? Sleep tight, loyal servant. Mummification is usually something you observe from a professional distance. You're the person who cleans up afterward, not the person who gets fitted for the process. But palace orders are palace orders. And apparently, your faithful service has earned you a promotion to a position you never applied for, eternal companion to a dead teenage pharaoh. They don't call it execution, because that would be rude. They call it honor, which is ancient Egyptian for, we're going to kill you, but we'll use nice words about it. You call it what it is, a long, awkward goodbye to personal space, breathing, and all the other minor luxuries you've grown accustomed to during your brief stint as a living person. The irony isn't lost on you that after years of struggling to stay alive in various terrible jobs, you're now being killed as a reward for doing one of those jobs well. It's like getting a promotion to a position that doesn't exist, except the position is dead person, and it definitely exists. The preparation process for your eternal service is conducted with all the ceremony and attention to detail that you've come to expect from palace operations, which is to say it's elaborate, expensive, and completely focused on making other people feel better about what's happening to you. The religious officials explain that you're being given a tremendous honor, that your service will continue in the afterlife, and that you should feel grateful for the opportunity to accompany a pharaoh into eternity. You're not feeling particularly grateful, but you're also not in a position to express alternative opinions about your career trajectory. The officials conducting your preparation are the same people who used to ask you to fetch oil and organize scrolls, and now they're organizing your transition from living servant to dead servant with the same bureaucratic efficiency they brought to all their other administrative tasks. The mummification process, when you're the subject rather than the assistant, turns out to be remarkably similar to the preservation procedures you helped perform on other people. Except now, you're acutely aware of every step because you're experiencing it personally. The embalmers work with professional competence and religious reverence, treating your body like a sacred vessel that needs to be properly prepared for its eternal journey. Your organs are removed and placed in canopic jars with the same careful attention to detail that characterized the preservation of actual pharaohs, which is either a sign of respect or a sign that the embalmers are too professional to adjust their standards based on the social status of their subjects. Your heart is left in place because it will be needed for the afterlife judgment process. Assuming you make it that far, and assuming the afterlife judgment process is actually a real thing, and not just something people made up to make death seem less random. The wrapping process involves enough linen to supply a small textile factory, applied in layers with mathematical precision and religious significance. Each layer is blessed, each fold is positioned according to ritual requirements, and each step is accompanied by prayers that are supposed to ensure your successful transition to the afterlife. The embalmers work quietly and efficiently, transforming you from a person into a religious artifact, with the same matter-of-fact professionalism they bring to all their preservation work. Your preserved body is placed in a sarcophagus that's decorated with images and hieroglyphs that tell the story of your service to Tutankhamun and your qualifications for eternal companionship. The artwork is actually quite good. Whoever painted your death container clearly took pride in their work and wanted to create something that would last for thousands of years, which is more job security than you ever had while you were alive. The tomb preparation is conducted with the kind of attention to detail that you've learned to associate with palace operations. Every aspect of the burial chamber is planned, measured, and executed according to specifications that combine religious requirements with practical considerations, like structural integrity and protection from tomb robbers. Your final resting place is being constructed with more care and precision than any of the living spaces you occupied during your actual life. The burial goods that will accompany you into the afterlife include items that cost more than entire villages see in a year: golden jewelry, precious stones, elaborately decorated furniture, and various other luxury items that are apparently necessary for afterlife comfort. You're being buried with more wealth than you ever had access to while you were alive, which seems like poor resource allocation, but which makes sense according to ancient Egyptian economic theory. As the tomb is sealed and the sand begins to swallow your name from the records of the living world, you have time to take stock of your situation. You were born in dust, lived in sweat, and you're dying in style. Sort of. Your final surroundings are gold-plated, which is definitely an upgrade from straw and limestone, though you're not in a position to fully appreciate the improvement in your living conditions. You've officially become a footnote in a teenager's afterlife decor, which is probably the most job security you've ever had. Your position as eternal companion is guaranteed for as long as eternity lasts, with no possibility of reassignment, downsizing, or budget cuts. It's steady work, even if the working conditions are somewhat limiting, and the social opportunities are restricted to conversations with other dead people. The tomb is equipped with everything a dead pharaoh and his companion might need for eternal comfort. Food that will never spoil because you'll never eat it, furniture that will never wear out because you'll never use it, and entertainment that will never get boring because you'll never experience it. The afterlife provisions are comprehensive and well organized, like a hotel room that's been prepared by people who've never actually stayed in a hotel. Somewhere in the dark, a scarab scuttles across your foot like an ironic punctuation mark, which seems appropriate given your current situation. Scarabs are symbols of rebirth and eternal life, so having one use your foot as a walkway is either a good omen or a cosmic joke, depending on your perspective and your opinion about the reliability of ancient Egyptian symbolism. The sound of the tomb being sealed echoes through the chamber, with a finality that makes it clear you've reached the end of one phase of your existence and the beginning of another phase that you didn't choose and don't fully understand. The workers outside are probably already moving on to their next project, while you're settling into what is definitely your final job assignment. Sleep tight, eternal employee. The tomb is silent now, filled with the kind of quiet that only comes from being buried under tons of stone and sand with no possibility of mail delivery or unexpected visitors. It's you, the king, and the distinctive aroma of ceremonial resin, which smells like a combination of expensive perfume and the world's most elaborate science experiment. The air has that special quality that comes from being completely isolated from the outside world, thick, still, and absolutely committed to staying exactly where it is for the next several thousand years. You breathe shallowly, partly because deep breathing seems unnecessarily optimistic given your current circumstances, and partly because you're trying to make your oxygen supply last as long as possible, though you're not entirely sure why, since there's no rescue mission coming and no emergency exit strategy. It's like trying to conserve water on a sinking ship, technically logical but ultimately pointless. In the darkness, you think about onions, not because you're particularly hungry, being dead apparently reduces your appetite significantly, but because onions were such a constant presence in your life that thinking about them feels like meditation. You remember the way they made your eyes water when you were too tired to produce tears naturally, the way they flavored every meal whether you wanted them to or not, and the way they represented the baseline level of nutrition that kept you functional enough to perform manual labor. You regret not punching someone during your lifetime. Anyone would have done. An overseer who hit you with sticks, a noble who complained about eyeliner while you were carrying stones, a palace administrator who made simple tasks complicated, or even just a random person who seemed like they deserved punching. You had plenty of opportunities for punching, but you were always too focused on not getting killed to take advantage of them. Now that getting killed is no longer a concern, you realize you missed out on one of life's simple pleasures. But also, and this is surprising given your current situation, this is the closest you've come to actual rest in your entire life. For the first time since you were born, behind a grain silo, nobody is expecting you to carry anything, clean anything, or move anything from one place to another place. There are no sunrise wake-up calls, no overseer schedules to follow, no daily quotas to meet. Your to-do list for eternity consists of exactly 0 items, which is incredibly relaxing, even though you're dead. You lie beside the boy who once laughed at your jokes and occasionally shared his grapes, which were always the sweetest grapes you'd ever tasted, because sharing food was a luxury that made even ordinary fruit taste like royal delicacies. He's wrapped in linen that cost more than most people's houses, surrounded by golden artifacts that represent more wealth than entire kingdoms possess. but he's still just the kid who thought your sarcastic comments about palace life were funny. The irony of your situation isn't lost on you, even in death. You spent your entire life working to build monuments for other people's afterlives, and now you're starring in your own afterlife monument. You're part of the archaeology now, a piece of the historical record that future scholars will puzzle over when they eventually break into this tomb and try to figure out who you were and why you're here. You imagine archaeologists one day cracking this place open, probably with more sophisticated tools than the ones you used to carry limestone, possibly with better safety equipment than Try Not to Die, and definitely with more respect for worker safety regulations than anything you experienced during your career in ancient Egyptian construction. They'll shine lights into the darkness, photograph everything from multiple angles, and catalogue every artifact with scientific precision. When they find you, they'll probably whisper questions like, "Was this guy the comic relief?" And "What was his relationship to the pharaoh?" And "How did he end up here?" They'll study your bones for clues about your diet, your health, and your working conditions. They'll analyse the wrapping materials, the positioning of your body, and the burial goods that were included with your remains. They'll write papers about you and include you in museum exhibitions about ancient Egyptian life. And maybe you were the comic relief. Maybe that was your actual job description all along. Person who makes sarcastic comments about the absurdity of daily life in a civilization that worships cats and builds triangular monuments to dead people. You certainly had plenty of material to work with. Ancient Egypt was basically one long comedy routine, performed by people who were too busy trying not to die to realize how ridiculous everything was. But you were also more than just entertainment. You lived, you fought against circumstances that were designed to kill you, and you climbed a social pyramid that was almost as dangerous as the actual pyramids you helped build. You started as disposable labor and worked your way up to trusted companion, which is probably the ancient Egyptian version of the American dream, except with more sand and fewer opportunities for retirement planning. You survived Egypt longer than most kings, which is actually pretty impressive when you think about it. Most pharaohs died young from political intrigue, military conflicts, or mysterious illnesses that may or may not have been poisoning. You died from job hazards, which is at least honest. Your death certificate would probably read, "Killed by loyalty" or "died from being too good at his job," which are more dignified causes of death than "assassinated by his own brothers," or "died from infected tooth." The silence in the tomb is complete now, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of sounds you never noticed before, like the settling of stone, the movement of air through tiny gaps in the masonry, and the distant sounds of sand shifting against the sealed entrance. It's peaceful in a way that your life never was, free from the constant noise of construction work, palace politics, and human misery that characterized your daily existence. You're finally getting the rest you never had time for during your actual life. The kind of deep, uninterrupted sleep that was impossible when you were sharing straw beds with 17 other workers, or trying to stay alert for palace dangers while following a teenage pharaoh around dangerous staircases. Death, it turns out, is the ultimate vacation from the exhausting work of staying alive in ancient Egypt. The golden treasures surrounding you gleam in whatever minimal light filters through the tomb, creating an environment that's more luxurious than anywhere you lived while you were breathing. You're surrounded by artwork, jewelry, furniture, and decorative objects that represent the highest achievements of ancient Egyptian craftsmanship. Your final accommodations are definitely an upgrade from every previous living situation you experienced. In the distance, you can almost hear the sound of future tourists complaining about the heat, while they marvel at monuments you helped build, guided by people who will explain the wonders of ancient Egyptian civilization without mentioning the working conditions that made those wonders possible. They'll take photographs of pyramids and temples, buy souvenirs from gift shops, and return home with stories about the amazing engineering achievements of people who lived thousands of years ago. But that's okay. You were never building monuments for recognition anyway. You were building them because the alternative was being beaten with sticks or reassigned to worse jobs. The fact that your work will be admired by future generations is just a bonus. Like getting a good performance review for a job you never wanted, but performed well anyway. So sleep well, little servant. You've earned this rest through years of carrying stones, dodging political intrigue, and keeping a pharaoh alive long enough for him to die of natural causes instead of unnatural ones. You've graduated from the brutal education system of ancient Egyptian life with honors in survival, sarcasm, and stubborn persistence. Your diploma is a golden sarcophagus, and your final grade is eternity. You survived longer than most, worked harder than anyone should have to, and maintained your sense of humor through circumstances that would have broken people with better initial circumstances and more life options. You turned forced labor into faithful service, transformed survival instincts into loyalty, and somehow managed to find friendship in a relationship that was never supposed to be about friendship. And may your next life, whatever form it takes and wherever it happens, have soap, and running water, and weekends, and labor laws, and the kind of social safety net that makes it possible to live without constantly worrying about being beaten with sticks for minor infractions, or reassigned to worse jobs for imaginary failures. May you never again have to eat onions as a main course, sleep on straw that's older than the monuments you're building, or work construction projects that prioritize architectural achievement over worker safety. May your next existence include basic human dignity, reasonable working conditions, and the kind of job security that doesn't depend on keeping teenage pharaohs alive in a political environment designed to kill them. Sweet dreams from the land of eternal rest, where the workday never starts, the overseer never comes around with motivational sticks, and the only stones you'll ever have to move are the ones that keep your tomb safely sealed from tomb robbers and curious archaeologists. Goodnight from the afterlife, where the benefits package includes eternal rest, premium burial accommodations, and job security that lasts until the end of time. Sleep tight, tomb buddy, in your gold-plated bedroom with the pharaoh roommate who appreciates your sense of humor and the insect visitors who provide ambient entertainment. And remember, you may have died from being too loyal to a teenage king, but you lived long enough to see your jokes appreciated by royalty, which is probably the ancient Egyptian equivalent of getting your own Netflix comedy special. Rest in peace, eternal comedian. You've finally found a job with no performance reviews, no workplace hazards, and absolutely no possibility of being promoted to something worse.